Episode 1 of The Morning Show starts out with Chip Black, the executive producer of The Morning Show, getting a phone call. And seemingly everybody that is involved with The Morning Show is getting the same phone call. And that phone call is to alert them that Mitch Kessler, one of the staples of The Morning Show, has been fired for sexual harassment. Now, Chip is constantly trying to get in touch with his co-anchor, Alex Levy, but she's not picking up the phone, so it results in Chip having to meet her outside of the Morning Show headquarters. But when she gets the news, she's shocked. She's also pissed at Chip because Chip knew that they were looking into these allegations, but he didn't tell Alex. The sexual harassment had been leaked to the New York Times, and because of that, it forced UBA, the company that owns The Morning Show, it forced their hand. And this is all happening at about 3:30 in the morning. So Alex is pissed off at Chip, but Chip says, look, you told me to stay away from you. You told me to kind of not alert you to these sort of things. But she's pissed off because this is not a little thing. This is her TV husband we're talking about. And because this is happening so soon, and the morning show goes live in a few hours, they're having to throw Yanko Flores, the meteorologist of the morning show, into Mitch's chair. But UBA, along with Chip, have to do damage control on how to handle this whole situation. So Chip gets on a phone call with Corey Ellison, who's the new head of the news division. He came from entertainment, but he's only been doing news for about a month. And his boss, Fred. And what they decide is to address this thing head on, address it as soon as the morning show starts. Alex will address the nation and say exactly what happened, and that they're horrified to learn of these allegations. But Alex is having to do all this in the middle of a contract negotiation with UBA. So in a way, this couldn't come as a worse time for her, but in a way, it's kind of the best time for her. And as she's trying to mentally prepare herself for this speech, Mitch is constantly calling her, but she's ignoring the phone calls. And finally, it's time to actually start the show, and Alex kills it. She dials in, she gives a completely spectacular performance, and it's one of her best performances in years. And while she's doing this, Mitch is at home with all of his lawyers and his team, watching this, feeling like he's getting railroaded by someone that he's known for 20 years and worked with. He's listening to his TV wife tell the nation how disappointed she is in him, and he feels kind of betrayed because of it. And when Mitch is seeing this, Mitch kind of just starts to flip out a little bit. It slowly builds from him saying that he didn't rape anybody, the women came on to him, they wanted it. The typical stuff you'd think you'd hear from a guy charged with sexual harassment. But then he takes it one step further and just grabs a fire poker and starts bashing his TV in because he just can't bear to witness it any longer. To make matters worse, his wife comes in the room and tells him that she's filing for divorce because she hasn't really liked him in about 2 to 3 years anyway. Now, this story is sweeping the nation, and it's catching the eye of everybody in the industry, including a field anchor named Bradley Jackson, who is reporting from bumfuck West Virginia. And she's heading to a coal mine protest along with her cameraman and producer, and she doesn't really get along with her producer too much. And when they arrive, her producer tries to give her a little bit of advice and say, you got to be more likable. You can't be this brash and rough around the edges. You need to smile more. And Bradley kind of says, I'm not going to change who I am. And then he says, well, that's fine, but that open anchor chair is not going to you. They're giving it to the girl who's been there 3 years less than you because of the fact that she's likable. And this really irks Bradley. So she's pissed off about that, and then right before she goes on camera, she gets a call from her mother telling her that her mother is going to pick up her brother from rehab early. And this is a rehab that Bradley had to fight to get her brother into, and now her mother is just enabling her brother by picking him up early, and this pisses off Bradley even more. She's basically becoming a ticking time bomb. So right before she goes live, somebody knocks into her cameraman, and when she defends the cameraman, the guy says, "Shut up, you fake news bitch." And that's when Bradley snaps. She says, "You probably don't even know jack shit about Cole. Give me some facts about Cole." And sure enough, he knows nothing about Cole. It gets to the point where he actually apologizes to Bradley because of the fact that he's been schooled by this journalist. But unbeknownst to Bradley, there are cameras rolling all around her, and this interaction is getting filmed. And when she gets back to the newsroom, this clip has gone viral, and it's making Bradley an internet celebrity for the moment. But she isn't focused on that. She's focused on the fact that she didn't get this open anchor chair, so she approaches her boss, and her boss points to the clip and says, "This is why you're not getting that open anchor chair. And this is why you've bounced around so much." I mean, hell, there's the incidents with Two Fucks Jackson. And Two Fucks Jackson is when Bradley was starting out in the industry, she said fuck live on air. And when she realized she said fuck on air, she said fuck again, hence the nickname Two Fucks Jackson, and it's carried her throughout her entire career. So when he brings this up, it pisses off Bradley even more, and she quits on the spot. Now, as I said, that clip went viral, and one of the people that saw the clip was a PA on the morning show named Claire, who calls over the head booker of the morning show, a girl named Hannah, and says, "Hey, you were looking for strong female empowerment? I think I found it right here." So Hannah heads down to bumfuck West Virginia to try to get Bradley to get on the morning show. With the recent sexual harassment allegations against Mitch, it's a good look for the morning show to have the strong female empowerment angle. But when Hannah finds Bradley, Bradley is at her mother's house discussing how important it is for her brother to have stayed in rehab. And it just seems like her and her mom, her brother, they don't really have the best relationship. Now, Bradley and her brother have a good relationship, but Bradley is frustrated with her mother and how she babies and enables her addict of a brother. So when Hannah shows up at the doorstep, it kind of takes Bradley off guard, but she says, yeah, sure, I'll go, because it's the morning show. And also, her schedule just got freed up because she got, let go / quit / fired. Now, speaking of New York, the morning show is wrapped, and Alex Levy is still extremely pissed off. She starts reaming into Chip about this whole situation, basically saying it was his fault because he's the executive producer. To make matters worse for Chip, Corey and Fred, the heads of UBA, have shown up, and it takes Chip a little bit off guard, and he says, oh, I'm surprised to see you here. And Corey says, Chip, when the Exxon Valdez smashes into a rock and a bunch of crude oil spills into the ocean, you drop what you're doing and you show up. And that kind of tells you the magnitude of this situation. So Corey is in town to meet with Chip, and Alex is currently meeting with her team, her agents, her lawyers, and now she's trying to look out for number one. And the good news for Alex is, because of the fact they fired Mitch, the power in the contract negotiations have shifted to Alex because they obviously cannot lose both Alex and Mitch. And you could just see in the look in Alex's face that she's extremely exhausted through this whole situation. But that quickly changes when her daughter shows up. Her daughter is in town to see a play with her school, but she's also in town because Alex is going to receive an award in a few days. And right behind her daughter is her husband. Now, they're separated, but they still have a very good relationship. And Alex is just relieved to finally see her daughter through this whole situation. But unfortunately for Alex, the entertainment business is pretty cutthroat. And while she's hugging her daughter, Corey and Chip are meeting to discuss the future of the morning show. And Corey says, look, it's great that she was dialed in today, but she hasn't been dialed in for a while. And to make matters worse, the morning show's ratings have dipped. So maybe the fact that Mitch is no longer here, maybe it's going to reinvigorate Alex and it'll actually help the show. He reminds Chip that they're not in the news industry. People get news on their phones in a matter of seconds. They're in the entertainment industry and they're here to entertain. And the entertaining ones will get the ratings. And the ratings get the ad dollars. Now, because of everything that happened with Mitch, Alex has decided that one of the things that she wants in her new contract is co-host approval, but UBA is completely pushing back on that. But it's very important to Alex because chemistry is everything to her. She's extremely stressed out when she shows up for work on Tuesday because of the whole contract negotiation. And as she sits in her chair getting makeup and hair done, she's watching Bradley Jackson's clip, and she's not buying it. She thinks that Bradley Jackson knew the cameras were rolling and kind of orchestrated this whole thing to become a viral sensation. And because of this, it makes for a very awkward interview and a very awkward interaction between Bradley and Alex. Right off the bat, Alex is very rude to Bradley, and when she starts interviewing her, she kind of challenges her on the fact that, did you know the cameras were rolling? But Bradley handles it beautifully. She defends herself, and then at the very end compliments Alex. And this really impresses Corey, who ends up calling Bradley that night and says, you should really meet me at my hotel for a drink to discuss your future. Bradley says, is this my big break? And he says, that's up to you. So while Bradley is getting the call, Alex is finally going to face her demons, and she ends up breaking into Mitch's house. And when Mitch comes downstairs, he doesn't find a burglar, but he finds his former co-host, and she's pissed. She starts accosting him for putting her in this situation and just calling him stupid for what he did. And he's trying to play this off as the victim. Now, through this whole argument, you do find out that they did, in fact, have sex twice. But more importantly, she's pissed off because they had such good chemistry on the set. And it was extremely important to her to keep that going. And as Alex goes to leave, Mitch drops another bombshell that they were actually looking to push her out. She doesn't initially buy it, but he says, no, they came to me and they were actively looking to get rid of you. And that's maybe why they were dragging their feet on the contract negotiations. In episode 2, Bradley ends up meeting with Corey in the hotel bar, and it's not lost on her that she's meeting with the head of a studio at a hotel bar on the heels of sexual harassment allegations. But he puts her mind at ease and says, hey, I understand this what it looks like, but I only sleep with people that want to sleep with me. But it becomes clear pretty early on that Bradley is not here to exchange pleasantries, and she's very upfront about everything. To the point where Corey says, do you treat every single business meeting like a war? And she says, well, every business meeting is. And the problem is she still hasn't gotten her answer on what she's doing there. And finally, Corey tells her, I want you to be a part of the morning show, but you've got some issues in your past. She cuts him off right there and says, I can explain Two Fucks Jackson. And he says, Two Fucks what? Because Corey had no idea about this story. And she says, I'll explain later. Corey proceeds on to tell her that she'll have a meeting tomorrow with Chip Black, the morning show producer, at 9:30 and to be prepared for it. And even after all this, her guard is still up. Now, the next day, Alex arrives at the office, and everyone's trying to prepare for the speech that she has, but all she's concerned about is her contract. And as soon as she gets in her dressing room, she calls her agent. She asks, do you think the fact that the network is stalling is their way of trying to push me out? And the agent is honest with her and says, It's not the best sign in the world, but right now we have them by the balls. But Alex is still stressed out and demands that her agent get the deal done as soon as possible, but also get everything they're demanding, including co-host approval, which the network has no interest in doing. But Alex isn't the only one that is stressed out in the office. This includes the fill-in co-host Yanko Flores, who's usually the meteorologist, but now is doing the fill-in job of Mitch. And he's stressed out because he is dating Claire, the PA, the same PA that found Bradley Jackson. And they have a consensual relationship going on, but because of these allegations, he's concerned that the optics are not good. And when he kind of pushes Claire away, she gets a little put off by this. You can totally understand his hesitation. Now, right before the show actually is going to go live on air, Fred and Corey meet with the staff to kind of put the fear of God into the staff. Fred really spearheads the meeting and gives an update on the sexual harassment allegations, but then says how important it is that they have a good show because May sweeps are coming up. And they've already lost plenty of ad dollars to their competition. Fred does the whole boss thing where you say, if you can't do it, we'll find somebody who can, and is once again trying to put the fear of God into these people. But Corey is behind his back just nodding and saying, no, that's not true, and kind of trying to put the staff at ease. When the meeting wraps up, Corey and Fred end up having a private conversation, and Fred tells Corey that we have to have a plan together to get Alex off the show. But Billy assures him that that's already in the works. Fred tells him that when we put you in this position, and I'll remind you, less than a month ago, we had no idea we'd be facing the toughest crisis in this station's history. But Corey shoots back, well, some people would say that you should have. Fred gives him a death stare and says, I know what you're doing, and the fact that you just started here doesn't give you leverage right now. And Corey very calmly says, I'm not looking for leverage, Fred. I'm just stating the obvious. It would have been better if we knew, so we could have stopped it, but we didn't know. Right? And this is a very accusatory right. Now, right before the show, Chip is running around doing about 50 different things, and Corey comes to him and says, hey, you're going to have a meeting with Bradley Jackson at 9:30. But Chip is kind of thrown. He doesn't understand why he would even waste his time having a meeting with Bradley Jackson. Corey explains to her that he wants her to interview for a correspondent job, and you got to spice things up here to boost the ratings. Chip asks him, do you have any idea how many people saw that video? And Corey says, yeah, exactly. I know how many people saw that video. This is entertainment, so meet with her at 9:30. But suddenly another issue occurs, because right before she's going to go on air, Alex finds out that the network is not going to give in on co-host approval. And Alex has had enough, and she says, I'm not going to go on air. Her and Chip continue to play this game of chicken, and Alex wants him to promise her that she will get co-host approval, as if Chip has that power. She's telling those around her to get ready for someone to sit in that chair because it won't be her, and Chip is telling her, I can't promise you this. I don't have that power. But finally, Alex ends up winning out just in the nick of time, and Chip caves, saying, I promise to get you co-host approval. And Alex goes on air, and the country has no idea what happened just 20 seconds beforehand. Now, after the Yanko Flores disaster of the previous day, he's back to weather, and they needed somebody to fill in for Mitch's chair, and they went to Daniel Henderson. Now, Daniel Henderson is a guy who is very intelligent, but feels like he's being misused on the morning show. He's black, he's gay, he's being sent to cover things like Gossip Girl the musical, but he didn't come here for that, and he wants that chair. He meets with Chip afterwards to discuss why he isn't already in that chair, and Chip says, look, man, if you want some advice, you got to be more likable. Which is ironic because that's the same advice that Bradley Jackson got. But he says, you know what people liked about Mitch? The fact that they could envision sitting next to Mitch in the DMV and just having a normal conversation with him. He was like the everyman. At first, Daniel takes this as an insult, but cooler heads end up prevailing, and Chip tells him, go to this award show tonight. Go to this award show tonight, rub some elbows, and just be likable, and you could, in fact, get this chair. Now, Mitch is having to transition from one meeting to another, and this time it's with Bradley Jackson, but he doesn't want to do it. And unfortunately for Bradley Jackson, she has no idea about this. So she comes in there with ideas, but Chip doesn't want to hear any of them. He cuts her off and says, are you trying to be a correspondent or a producer? Because now I'm confused. And she says, well, I like to do both. So she continues to pitch him ideas, but it's obvious in this meeting that Chip is not really there. He's answering emails, he's getting interrupted, and on top of it, he's not really listening to Bradley or any of her ideas, he's just nixing them. And since Bradley isn't one to sugarcoat things, she takes it as an insult and goes after Chip, saying, you had no questions about these stories, you weren't even interested in them. And Chip is shocked and says, are you serious right now? Yeah, this meeting's over. Chip tries to walk out, but Bradley is following him, telling him how shitty the morning show is. Finally, Chip threatens to get security to remove her, and she says, listen to your last couple of stories that you had today. How many ice cream flavors are there? 2 twins that met on Tinder. Your show sucks. You need real news. And then she storms out of the place. And she's ready to leave town and go back to West Virginia, but before she does, she gets a call from Corey's assistant, and the assistant tells her that Corey is requesting her to be at this award ceremony for Alex that night. And this throws her for a loop, because she says, that meeting that I just had went terribly. And the assistant then tells her, look, all I know is that we're sending you gowns over, so I would be there if I were you. So Bradley pulls a U-turn and goes right back into the hotel. But while it seems the morning show is in shambles, it's not all bad news, because Hannah, the head booker, has been able to track down a Mitch accuser, and the Mitch accuser was originally going to go on their competition, but Hannah convinced her to actually come on the morning show. She told her that if you go on the competition, it's going to look like you're a scorned lover, but if you go onto this show, the morning show, you're coming into Mitch Kessler's house, and you are accusing him of something that is reprehensible. It will look like you are a strong woman instead of somebody who's just trying to get even. Now, speaking of Mitch, he has met with his financial advisor who says you're not going to get paid for a while. They're not paying your contract. There's a morality clause in your contract that they're exercising, so you need to scale back a bit. And Mitch is puzzled. He goes, I have more money than God. But the issue is, yes, you have more money than God. You also have 3 homes, 3 mortgages, a lavish lifestyle. You don't want to give up your apartment in New York. The financial advisor lets him know you can live like this for maybe 2 years, and then you're going to have to go work at Trader Joe's. So Mitch is obviously stressed out and starts losing his mind over this morality clause. He says, you don't want to be the dickhead who says, no, take out the morality clause, but then they'll use it any way they want to not pay you. I mean, what is a morality clause after all? So he is enraged, but he's got a party to go to because he still plans on going to this award ceremony for his former co-host Alex tonight. And that day he gets a visit from his former producer Chip, who's begging him not to go. But Mitch tells him, you have 2 choices when this happens. You can either sit back and wait for these allegations to come and do nothing, or you can attack it. And I'm planning on attacking it. And Chip says, stop. Stop trying to contact every journalist in the area to get your story out. This isn't going to blow over in a day. This is going to blow over in years. So you're just going to have to wait. And while I don't agree with your situation right now, because I feel like guys are just simply being punished for years of misconduct and the court of public opinion is too quick to judge without hearing the other side of it, it's simply the day and age that we live in. So don't come to the event tonight because it's not going to be a good look for you or us. But this plea falls on deaf ears, and Mitch says, you know, my suit's pressed and I'm coming. And I'm going to look every single reporter in the eye who trashed me and didn't ask for my side on anything. So Mitch is planning on heading to this event. And obviously so is Alex, but she doesn't want to go. She wants to play sick. She's confiding in her family that she doesn't want to do this. But when it comes time to get on the red carpet, she puts on a great face and a good smile. And you'd never know there was an issue. So pretty much everybody in the industry is there, including Corey. And right before the event, Chip finds Corey and tells him how bad the meeting with Bradley Jackson went. But Corey doesn't really say much. He just kind of nods. Because unbeknownst to Chip, Bradley is coming at the behest of Corey. And no one, including Bradley for that matter, knows what she's doing there. So Corey sees her and starts ushering her over to her seat, which ironically is at the UBA table. And this throws everybody for a loop. And to make it worse, she's going to be sitting right next to Alex. And obviously those two didn't have the best first meeting. At one point she turns to Alex and says, I don't even know why I'm here. And Alex just kind of gives her a smirk and says, yeah, that makes 2 of us. Alex is taking it as an insult. Now, Alex and Bradley end up actually running into each other in the women's room. And Alex tells her, you're being played right now. They're putting you here to make me worried about my job. And Bradley says, yeah, it's really awkward for me. And Alex cuts her off and says, well, if it's so awkward, why don't you leave? You're an adult. Leave. If it's so awkward for you, get out. And Bradley says, you know, I'm not you. All right, I don't have the ability to go tell a head of a network to go fuck himself. And after Alex walks out of the bathroom, she sees Corey Ellison. And she says, I'm going to tell you right now, I need co-host approval or I'm walking. And Corey doesn't blink and says, okay, well, if you have to do that, then you have to do that. The conversation gets pretty heated, and it ends with Corey telling her, by the way, we bought this award for you. So at this point, Alex is pissed off and hurt. She gets up at the award ceremony to accept her award. And right before she does so, she says, everybody get your phones out because I'm going to announce the new co-anchor of the morning show. It is Bradley Jackson, to the surprise of everybody in the room, including Bradley. Oh, and if you're wondering where Mitch was this entire time, he wisely decided to stay in the car and not show up. Episode 3 starts out directly after Episode 2, and Bradley is still in shock, but she's taking pictures with people, but she's really just trying to figure out exactly what just happened. Same goes for the network executives who tell everybody to get to the studio ASAP. They want to do some damage control on this because obviously they had no idea that this announcement was going to take place. Before he can get out of there, Corey is pressed by the media about this announcement, and he acts like it was obviously their decision, and he announces that the new morning show will start on Monday. So this gives them 2 days to get prepared. After making the announcement, Corey heads to the studio with Fred, and Fred is irate. He says, why shouldn't I fire you right now? Fred is pissed at Corey for acknowledging that this will be the show. Corey says, this morning show has been stale, and Alex's sell-by date was years ago, and everybody knew that we were going to fire her. But because Mitch was fucking everything that moved, now we have to keep her. So we're going to put this nobody in that she handpicked, and it's going to make her think that she gets a minor victory. But in reality, it's just freshening up the show. And when it comes time to actually replace Alex, we're not going to look like the bad guys. So just give me a month and it's either going to work out or it's not, but at the very least, it'll freshen up the show. So Corey and Fred are already at the studio and the two hosts are heading there. Bradley was ushered out of the event by a producer named Mia, and while in the car, Bradley tells her that she doesn't even want the job. But whether she wants it or not, she's going to the studio. When they arrive, Mia is stumping for the job as Bradley's #1 producer. She's telling Chip that she's been in purgatory far too long and she's earned this. And Chip doesn't really give her an answer because he's focused on addressing the entire production team to a situation that 35 minutes ago he didn't know existed. But before he can really do it, Corey barges in the room and doubles down on this. Says it's happening. Alex jumped the gun a little bit on the announcement, but they've been quietly vetting Bradley Jackson for months now. And that's one of the reasons why they're hiring her is because she's a veteran. But Chip interjects and says, well, she's not an anchor veteran. She's never been an anchor, actually. But Corey doesn't really care about that because he's got 48 hours to figure out who Bradley Jackson is. He needs focus groups. He needs contracts. He needs wardrobe. And Mia jumps in and says it's not even a guarantee that she's going to go on Monday. Corey's a little surprised by this and asks who she is, and she says, I'm Mia Jordan. I'm Bradley's producer. And to his credit, Chip backs her up on this. So Mia Jordan saw her shot, and she took it, and it worked out. And now Hannah, the head booker, is taking her shot. She says to the room that she has a Mitch accuser, and it's not the best optics to start a new morning show with a Mitch accuser, but it's a Mitch accuser. But Corey disagrees and says, no, that's great optics. This shows that this is a safe space for women. This will be the morning show that gives voice to the women, and they won't be silenced. Now, while this is going on, Alex is also heading to the studio, and she's on the phone with her agent being reamed out because her making this announcement is a breach of contract, and the agent is imploring her to go into this meeting, sincerely apologize, and pray to God at the end of it that she still has a job because they could fire her. But Alex has no interest in doing that whatsoever. And the meeting goes about as well as her agent expected, with Fred reaming her out, telling her that she should be fired, saying a lot of words that are going in one ear and out the other, and then finally Alex goes, are you done? And he, along with the rest of the room, is a little taken aback. And she says, I just want to know, are you guys done? Because the part that you don't realize is you no longer have the power. The news division is held up by my show. And the only thing keeping this news division afloat is me. Because guess what? America loves me. And therefore, I own America. So it seems pretty fucking simple, but it's so easy for you guys to forget. I don't need to justify anything to you guys. You guys think you're the rightful owner to all the power, but it doesn't even occur to you that somebody else might be in the driver's seat. So we have to gingerly step around your male egos in order not to burst your little precious bubble. Well, surprise! I'm bursting it. So we are going to do this my way because I've let you bozos handle this long enough. And then she looks right at Fred, the head of the network, and says, I'm sorry, was that not the apology you were expecting? Alex gets up and leaves, and as she's leaving, she passes by the main studio and she sees Bradley kind of just marveling at the empty studio. So she heads on in and Bradley asks, why did you do this? I don't even want this. And Alex says, of course you do. I just gave you the biggest news platform you could ever have. Bradley says, I don't really think this is true journalism, and Alex retorts with, how many former presidents have you interviewed? And Bradley's just worried that she's not this perky personality that they're after, but Alex isn't concerned with grooming a replacement. She wants a partner. Bradley's also worried that Alex just wants somebody who is happy to be plucked from obscurity, and she says, if you're looking for that, you're going to get extreme buyer's remorse. Alex says, you don't even know me, and I'm getting really sick and tired of people underestimating me. So I want you here at 7 tomorrow, get up at 5, get up at 4 the next day. Just condition yourself to be getting up early because you're doing this job. So while Bradley gets a job that she didn't necessarily want, it's now on the production staff to figure out who exactly she is. And they're all sitting around a conference table trying to figure it out. And in walks Alex. And this is the first time that Alex has been in a production room in years. But it's her attempt to be more hands-on. She wants to do the interview with the Mitch accuser, a girl named Ashley Brown. But everybody's still kind of looking at her a little cross-eyed. And finally she addresses the whole room and says, look, I had no idea what was going on with Mitch, all right? But I'm here for you now. So let's get through this together. So while it's great that Alex is preaching team unity, one guy wants to leave. Daniel Henderson storms into Chip's office and says, Why shouldn't I quit now? Because you promised me that chair, and you basically said it was mine to lose, and nothing's changed between now and that conversation. And Chip cuts him off and says, look, there's a good chance this isn't even going to work out, and there might be 2 chairs open. So don't quit, because when a chair does open up, it's going to be yours. And Daniel's anger towards the hiring and Chip's trepidation towards the hiring is echoed throughout a lot of the staff, and Bradley feels that. Later that night, Corey takes Bradley to Barney's and opens it up for a private selection, and she's allowed to pick whatever she wants, but she's not really into that. She's like, I'm not here to just act like my favorite movie is Pretty Woman. I mean, I like buying clothes, but honestly, a pantsuit is fine with me. And when she comes out in that pantsuit, Corey actually likes it because he says it reminds him of his mother. And people like his mom haven't had a view of somebody like their own in a while. But she's still worried about the optics of this. She's 40 years old, she's not married, she has no kids, and she doesn't think that the optics of this are going to be good for television, but Corey disagrees. He thinks that she's giving a voice to a lot of women out there. Now, on Saturday, the entire production staff is once again assembled, and the big thing on the docket is this interview with the Mitch accuser. And they just don't feel like Alex is right for the interview. And one of the people that's really banging the drum that Alex isn't right for this interview is Mia Jordan, Bradley's new producer. And it seems like there's a little bit of bad blood between Mia and Alex. At the end of this meeting, Mia barges into Alex's dressing room, and you come to find out that the reason that Mia was in purgatory, quote unquote, is because she slept with Mitch. The two had a relationship for a bit, and ever since it ended, she's kind of been pushed to the wayside. But Mia tells her, look, you can do this interview, and it's at the end of the day, it is your call, but it's not going to look good, and you're going to get roasted for it. So Alex reluctantly gives up the interview and says Bradley can interview the Mitch accuser. Now, this kind of pisses off Alex, so she leaves, and this pisses off Bradley because the two have yet to rehearse. Bradley's very concerned that the first time they actually are on set is the day of the show. So Bradley runs out and catches Alex right before she's about to take off, and Alex admits, I'm winging this whole thing. I have no idea why I picked you. And Bradley says, you didn't even acknowledge me this entire weekend. To which Alex says, I didn't know I needed to hold your hand. I thought I just needed a partner. And Bradley says, sometimes partners need their hand held. But the two still don't rehearse, and the next day is their first day on set, and Bradley is just standing there, wide-eyed, and Alex comes up behind her and holds her hand. It's a nice moment until Alex says, don't fuck this up. Now, Mitch in this episode has been dropped from his agent. His agent tells him, while we have a great working relationship, you're not going to be working for a while, so I gotta let you go. He also plays tennis at his house with a director, a guy named Dick Lundy, who's also been accused of sexual harassment. And they're having a conversation about how hard it is for guys nowadays, how the two have been railroaded by the media, by past lovers. And Mitch even brings up the idea of doing a documentary with the accusers. But the more he talks to Dick Lundy, the more he realized that Dick Lundy legitimately is a predator. He was basically doing like casting couch type situations. And while Mitch had, in his opinion, consensual sex, this guy was actually soliciting for sex and basically trading roles for dignity. And to Mitch's credit, he calls him on this, but you can tell that it's bothering Mitch that now Mitch is lumped in with this guy because he doesn't see himself as what Dick Lundy is, a predator. In episode 4, the morning show introduces Bradley Jackson to the world, and they have this contrived puff piece ready to go with her mom, making it look like Bradley grew up in the perfect childhood home where she cooked with her mom and had just a really good childhood. And it's really just a bunch of BS. And Bradley goes off script and says, it wasn't all happy. We did struggle at times, and it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. And Alex tries to reel her back in, but Bradley says, no, I just want girls out there to know that you don't need this perfect childhood to succeed in life, because you can come up from a tough upbringing and thrive. I had problems, and I'm not talking about just being dared to jump off a cliff into a body of water, but I was suspended from school, and I had an abortion at the age of 15, and when she says that, it's like a bomb going off, and she doesn't realize what she's saying until it's too late. And everybody just kind of freezes because it's such a shocking revelation to hear that. They quickly get Yanko Flores on to talk about the weather and really just distract America from what Bradley just said, but Chip and the bosses are freaking out. We're less than 5 minutes into Bradley Jackson's morning show career, and she just revealed that she had an abortion at the age of 15. This is not exactly the way they planned to start this thing out. And to make it even worse, her mother had no idea she had an abortion at the age of 15. And when she wakes up Tuesday, she opens up Twitter, and it's nothing but nasty messages from the pro-life people, and it proves that this story isn't going away. Bradley heads downstairs, and waiting for her is Alex in a car. And when Bradley gets in, she says, is this the part where you take me to the river and shoot me? And she says, no, this is the part where I take you to the studio to get back on that saddle and do this thing again. And act like yesterday never even happened. Bradley's a little perplexed and says, why do you keep helping me? And Alex is pretty honest and says, I picked you, and I don't want those corporate suits to think that they won. So unfortunately, I have to put up with your crap and maneuver around it because my career's on the line. So Bradley takes the suggestion, goes in, gets back on the saddle, and gives a heartfelt apology that was written on a teleprompter. But after the show, Chip, Alex, Fred and Corey are all meeting about what to do with this Bradley Jackson situation. And Fred wants to take her off of the interview with the Mitch accuser. And Alex says, we're not doing that because we've already run all these ads saying that she's going to be doing the interview. And if we take her off of it, it looks like a reactionary move. And then Corey interjects and says, yeah, look, half the country hates her, but half the country loves her. And if we take her off this interview, then the leftists that love her are going to now hate us because now we're the bad guy because we took her off the interview. So by taking her off of it, we're literally alienating everybody. So we might as well just keep her on. So it's decided that Bradley will stick with the interview. But Chip and the morning show team have another issue because after this meeting, an investigator has arrived, and she's going to go around and interview everybody on the morning show to figure out what the systematic problem is that allowed Mitch Kessler to get away with sexual harassment for so long. Before her interview, Chip goes to Mia and says, look, we got to kind of take one for the team here. Don't bury the company because of her past relationship with Mitch. And obviously, Mia had a relationship with Mitch, consensual, but you come to find out that it started off with flirting, then it moved into Mitch talking about his failed marriage and how there was really no sex life, and then it moved into consensual sex. But eventually, Mia called it off, and the investigator thinks that Mia is the one who tipped off the Mitch story to the New York Times. And the investigator says, I just figured that you would be the one to tip off to the New York Times because you're the one who went to HR about Mitch. And she says, I went to HR about Mitch because I was sick of seeing him stand up there and talk about the Me Too movement, acting all sincere when he clearly wasn't. So while we still don't know who tipped off the New York Times, we now know that Mia was the one who tipped off HR. So while Mia was able to open up to the investigator, everybody else is on edge. No one more so, though, than Yanko Flores, who is dating Claire, a younger PA. And to those that don't know the relationship, it looks a lot like the Mitch Kessler situation. Older guy dating a younger girl underneath him in the pecking order of the company. So he is extremely stressed out. And that night he's sitting there with Claire and he asks her, am I doing the stuff to you that Mitch did to these girls? And she says, no. If anything, the power difference in this relationship is on my side because while my father has never watched our show, he's powerful enough to make one phone call and get you fired. So if anybody's taking advantage of anybody here, it's me taking advantage of you. And while this is a nice sentiment, it still doesn't put Yanko's mind at ease. On Wednesday, a little bit of the heat from the Bradley Jackson announcing that she had an abortion at the age of 14 has worn off, and America is starting to positively respond to Bradley Jackson. She comes off as uniquely human in a field that has a ton of robots. At one point, she's reading off a teleprompter, and she's supposed to say young adult, but they don't type out young adult. They type out YA. So she literally says, yeah. And people seem to like that she can make mistakes. Now, while some of the heat has worn off, not all of it. There are still protesters outside protesting that she's hired. But the one thing that's changed is now there are protesters that are protesting those protesters that are supporting Bradley Jackson. And this story has gone viral all throughout the country to the point where in Mississippi, high schoolers are walking out of high school, boycotting school for 6 hours because there's only one abortion clinic left in Mississippi and it takes about 6 hours to get there. And when the governor of Mississippi made some offhanded comment about Bradley to help his political campaign, it completely backfired because people liked the fact that Bradley was honest. So in a way, this announcement has helped Bradley because while it alienated some people and it lost some sponsors, it got a lot of people's eyeballs on the show and it's picked up a lot of traction for the morning show. So much so that they're seeing ratings boosts that they haven't seen in years. And on Thursday, when the morning show has Kelly Clarkson perform her new song, Kelly Clarkson makes mention that she stands with Bradley and she loves Bradley Jackson. So the support for Bradley is rolling on into her Friday interview with the Mitch accuser. And before the show on Friday, Bradley's sitting in her office prepping, and Corey walks in and says, it's kind of weird being in here, right? This is where it all went down with Mitch. And she says, yeah, it's a little weird. And he says, I just wonder who knew. And that's the problem because no one's talking. Everybody's acting like Mitch was this saint, great guy, but nobody's saying they knew anything. At the moment, though, Bradley really doesn't care because while she's prepping, she has a problem. She feels like all the questions are softball questions. She feels like she's pushing this agenda for the company and protecting the company because the story they're planning on putting out there is that they had a flirtatious relationship, Mitch took it too far, and then she felt the pressure and she quit. And it's just hard to figure that that would lead to somebody quitting. And Mia says, yeah, you're doing a favor for the company, but don't get it twisted. This is a good, hard interview. So Bradley starts interviewing Ashley Brown, the Mitch accuser, and she starts throwing out the softball questions, and Ashley, as you can understand it, would be very reluctant to give any more details than she has to. And because of the fact she's not getting Ashley to open up, she decides to go off script. She asks her, why didn't you go to HR? Did you not think this was a safe work environment? And Ashley mentions that there was an incident, and while she's interviewing her, everybody in the control room is yelling at Bradley to get back on track. Except for Corey, who's continuing to tell her to go on and push forward. Literally, everybody's pissed off except Corey. Alex is so pissed off, she comes on the stage and just stares her down. But Alex mean-mugging her isn't going to deter her, and she keeps pushing on through the interview, trying to get Ashley to open up, and finally she does. Ashley reveals that she would go into Mitch's dressing room and blow him, and while she never told HR or never told anybody in the office, everybody knew what was going on. And because of what happened, everybody was kind of looking down on her, and what Mitch took from her was her dignity. And after a while, Ashley just didn't recognize the person who she became. And it is a really good interview, and Bradley certainly gets the most out of it, but when she comes off set, Alex is waiting for her and is livid. Alex says to her, I gave you this platform, but Bradley cuts her off and just says, did you know? And Alex is a little confused and says, what? And Bradley says, did you know about Mitch? And Alex looks her in the eyes and says, how dare you? And then storms off. Episode 5 starts out with the aftermath from Brandy's interview. Alex is very pissed off and tells her to never question her integrity again, while Chip wants to get a meeting with her to talk about not sabotaging her own career. But that meeting comes quickly to an end when he finds out that Mitch is back in the building and demanding to talk to the staff. Chip advises Mitch to leave, but Mitch doesn't want to and says, I've worked with these people for years. I need to address them. But the real reason why he's shown up is because there's a New York Times article that's about to come out. That's going to be pretty damning for Mitch, and he wants his former coworkers to come forward and defend him. And for whatever reason, Mitch is allowed to address the room, and it goes about as well as you'd think. Mitch is an emotional roller coaster, screaming 1 minute, but telling them that he loves them the next. And he's really just searching out somebody that will be the first one to raise their hand and say, I'll go on the record, but no one's doing it. His last-ditch effort is to plead to Alex, his former co-anchor, but she just walks out of the room, and at this point, security's had enough, and they escort him out of the building. As he's heading into the elevator, Brandy runs in and introduces herself to Mitch and asks who knew. To which Mitch just slyly turns around and says, what do you think? And then gives her a piece of advice, watch your back. So while Brandy ponders what Mitch said, she heads out for coffee and she runs into Hannah and Claire. And Hannah and Claire invite her out for a birthday party that night, expecting her not to show up because she's kind of a celebrity. But to their surprise, Brandy says, yeah, she'd love to come because she doesn't really know anybody in New York. She doesn't have a lot of friends. And on top of it, her co-host, Alex, didn't invite her to this fancy charity event that she's having at her house. So Brandy's schedule is wide open for that night. But that party is tomorrow, and before she can go out and celebrate with her coworkers, she has to do an interview with a journalist named Maggie, who really covers the entertainment industry for one of the publications. And Maggie's doing an expose on Brandy, who Brandy is, where she came from, and her rise to stardom. But she's also poking around about Alex and about Mitch, obviously, and she's a very good journalist, trying to get Brandy in a little bit of a hot water situation, but she's not taking the bait. But luckily for Brandy, most people in the office don't even care about that article. Most people care about the New York Times article that's coming out. The New York Times is called the UBA office and are on a conference call with Corey, Fred, and their lawyer. And since the Ashley Brown interview aired, 4 more women have come forward, and the New York Times want a quote. But UBA wants to know what these quotes are before they themselves give a quote. And after a little bit of haggling, you learn that there's women accusing Mitch of coming onto them in bathrooms, visits to their homes. We're talking you name it, he's accused of doing it. And the cherry on top is a very damning quote from his former assistant. So Corey and Fred tried to switch out that damning quote for the story that Mitch had to be escorted off the premises of the morning show. But the Times doesn't bite, and they say we'll run the story as is, which leaves Fred irate. He turns to the lawyer and says, you better fix this or you're going to find a new job. And then he turns his wrath onto Corey and says, nobody likes you. And what really pisses off Fred is Corey's laissez-faire attitude towards this whole situation. Corey never seems to get flustered, and he never seems to see the severity of the situation. He's just very casual with everything. And it pisses off Fred even more. Now, one of the guys that wasn't on this conference call that probably should have been was Chip, the executive producer. And Chip finds out about this conversation between Corey, Fred, the lawyers, and the New York Times because he meets with a New York Times reporter who wrote the story. And during their meeting, you find out that Chip was actually the source of the Mitch allegations that were leaked to the New York Times. And he's meeting with this guy because he wants to find out if he's going to be railroaded in this New York Times article. Apparently, Chip kind of got this guy the job, and Chip feels like he owes him that much. But the guy's not giving up the information, and Chip is now worried that he's going to lose his job. So Chip gets bombed and heads over to Alex's house, where she's hosting that upper crusty charity event that Brandy wasn't invited to. But one coworker who was invited to the event is Daniel Henderson, and he's being scouted by the competition. Audra, who is truly at this event for political purposes, and is Alex's rival, is at this event trying to tell Daniel that he's being underutilized at the morning show, and he really should come over and work for them. He's telling her that he's happy for the moment, but also the event is teaming with UBA executives, and this isn't the best place to talk. And there are some pretty important people at this event, including Corey and Fred. Now, obviously, Corey and Alex don't have the best relationship, and Corey jokes that he was only invited for political purposes. But just because he's hated by Alex doesn't mean Corey's not going to have a good time. And how could you not at this charity event that's really a bullshit charity with a very exciting silent auction like that's never been done before? And if you pay $1,000, you get to sing show tunes. This is the definition of the 1%. But Alex really doesn't care about talking to Corey or singing show tunes. She's waiting for Maggie, the journalist who was interviewing Brandy, to show up to try to poke and prod her for information on the Brandy interview. And when she does, Alex is trying to tell her off the record, but really it's on the record that Alex was the one who discovered Brandy. And it was Alex who actually saw what's best for the show, but Maggie sees right through this trying to trade information act. And Maggie takes a shot saying that, it seems like you're kind of worried that you're going to be forgotten in this whole thing because now your replacement's here. And this really pisses off Alex, and she says, well, off the record, I'm never going to be replaced. And I'm never going to be forgotten in any room whatsoever. So Chip's showing up drunk with a bunch of UBA executives, his coworkers, his peers, and a journalist. Not ideal. And Chip walks right up to Fred and says, I don't appreciate not being on that conference call, but Fred says, you weren't needed. And Chip says, I know how this works, right? The report from the New York Times comes out, and if it's damning, I'm not going to have a job, and you're going to put the blame on me. And Fred doesn't say anything. He just walks off. And then Chip looks at Corey and says, I just want to let you know, you're just as expendable as I am in this whole situation. And at this point, Corey's just looking for anybody else to talk to. So he sees Alex and books it over there and says, we haven't had a chance to talk since you announced Brandy as the co-host of the morning show. And the last time we talked, it wasn't a good talk, and I was pretty mean to you telling you that we bought you that award. But I gotta tell you that you were right. Hiring Brandy was the right move, and I know you don't trust me, but I feel like you're an evil genius, and I like to work with evil geniuses, and I want to work with you. And her only response to this is to tell him to go fuck himself. And he says, you still don't have faith in me, do you? So he dips into his wallet, pays $1,000, and starts singing show tunes, because that's the way to win over a coworker. While singing a song that the two alluded to previously in the show, you can tell that something's spooking Alex. And as soon as it's over, she books it out of there. She leaves her husband at her own charity event to schmooze with her coworkers, but she's got to get out. She's got to leave. And he, of course, wants to know where she's going, and finally she says, I'm going to see Mitch. He's my friend, and I have to talk to him, and I need you not to make a big thing out of this, but I'm going to see Mitch. And this gives you a pretty good look as to why these two are currently separated. And as soon as she leaves, Fred gets a call from the New York Times agreeing to take out that damning quote for the story that Mitch was escorted out of the UBA office. But Alex is now with Mitch driving around, and you can tell the chemistry these two have. They're driving around, they're laughing, they're talking about the good old days. And eventually Mitch pulls over the car and says, look, you're not with your husband, and I'm not with my wife, and this is the perfect time to get together. And Mitch is half joking, but half serious. One of those, like he's trying to kind of gauge the room. Alex just laughs, though, and says, yeah, this is just what I need. I need to be with a sexual predator at the moment. But the two end up kissing, and it's only stopped because they get an alert on their phone that the New York Times article is dropped. And it's pretty bad. Now, while that party was going on, Brandy is headed off to meet with her coworkers in a bar downtown. And when she walks in, she starts flirting with the bartender a little bit, but then she finally finds her party, and everybody's shocked she even showed up. And at first, the conversation is fun and jovial, but then it turns into sexual harassment allegations. And to make matters worse, everybody's a little drunk. And when Mitch gets brought up, Mia and Claire kind of go at it, and the conversation gets pretty heated because Mia, unbeknownst to a lot of the people, was very close to this situation. Eventually, it ends with apologies, but the situation definitely got awkward. And Mia ends up leaving for the night. But when she does, that's when they get the alert that the New York Times article is dropped. And all the girls are sitting there reading the story. And while she's reading it, Brandy gets a call from her dad. And she had gotten a call from her dad earlier in the show, but she ignored it. And she decides to call him back, and these two haven't spoken in 15 years. These two don't have a relationship at all, but he's calling to tell her that he's proud of her. She starts crying hearing this, but she says, you can't call me again. You can't do this. And she hangs up the phone and heads back inside. She ends up fucking the bartender that she was flirting with earlier, and then staggers back to her hotel room, where she runs into Corey, who ends up escorting her up to her hotel room. But at this point, everybody in town has read this story, including Mitch Kessler. And Mitch is incensed by one quote from Fred. he'll never work in this town again. So Mitch calls up Fred and says, if I'm going down, you're going down with me. In episode 6, the morning show is heading out to California to cover the California wildfires that were alluded to in episode 5. Fred, who ironically is having to flee his home because of the California wildfires, has made the decision to send the morning show out there because all the competition's out there and he thinks the optics would be good. But no one really seems to want to go, especially Alex, who right before she leaves has an argument with her husband who finally asks for divorce. And then there's Bradley, who wakes up hungover in Corey's hotel room, but nothing happened. He really just kept an eye on her. And all three of them separately head to the airport to get to California. And Alex is still treating Bradley like a complete and total bitch, but at this point, it has more to do with Alex's personal life than anything Bradley could actually do. And when they arrive in California, the team immediately starts going through stories they can cover, and they decide they're going to end the show with a guy who's saving puppies, but Bradley doesn't want to do that because she thinks it's a weak story to end on. And when Bradley suggests a harder story, Alex snaps back at her, is this going to be every day with you? We're morning TV. We want people to feel happy at the end of the show. We don't want people slitting their wrists. And the story that Bradley wants to cover is the fact that rich people are hiring their own firefighting teams to combat the blaze where the poor just have to watch their homes burn. And it's an interesting story, so Chip interjects and says, okay, we'll look more into that story for you, Bradley, but for the moment, we're going to end the show with the guy saving puppies. After the production meeting, Chip heads over to have a meeting of his own with Corey Ellison, who's covering UBA's entertainment department for the day. And Chip says that he feels like at this point they're in a mob family and the Don is coming for him, but Chip has connections to get him out of that job if Corey wants it. And Corey says, yeah, I've thought about it, but we need a story to come out that would make him look pretty bad, and right now, I don't know what that story is. And Chip says, yeah, I wonder what it would be. And Corey says, yeah, I wonder what it would be. And Corey's basically putting this in Chip's hands that if you want to keep your job because you're scared of what Fred might do, then you need to go find that story that makes Fred look really bad. That night, as the team continues to prep, Claire comes into Bradley's trailer, and Claire is the one who found the story on the firefighters being privatized by rich communities. And Bradley absolutely loves that story and tells her, you know, I'm interviewing possible assistants and I think you'd be great for the job, and offers it to her. And it's a great fit because Claire has loved Bradley's energy from the moment she started on the morning show. And Claire is over the moon with excitement and wants to share it with her boyfriend Yanko Flores, and while Yanko is proud of her, he doesn't want to be seen this close to her because of still the Mitch Kessler allegations. The next day, the morning show is going to kick off their first episode from the California wildfires, and right before they go to air, Bradley tries to talk to Alex, but Alex cuts her off and says, look, let's get something clear. You don't like me, and I don't like you, and all we have to do is work together for 2 hours a day, and then after that, we just have to act like civilized adults. And on screen, the two look fine, but off the screen, it's the exact opposite. And the main reason why is because Alex continues to treat Bradley like shit, but it has nothing to do with anything Bradley's doing. It really is Alex's personal life. And more specifically, her relationship with her own daughter. When they're not filming for the morning show, she's looking at pictures of her daughter, and she's tearing up. And she's blaming it on the smoke, but it's not the smoke. She's in a very fragile state. And at the end of the episode, they do that segment with the guy saving dogs, and he mentions his family, and that hits an emotional chord, and then he brings up the dog who he saved and that you don't want to break up a family because the dog had puppies. And Alice completely loses it. I mean, she's having a breakdown on camera to the point where Bradley actually has to finish this interview. And since this never happened before, everybody in the morning show is pretty concerned about Alex. Alex goes and hides in her trailer, and Bradley goes after her. And at first, Alex is pretty rude to Bradley, but then she starts throwing up, and Bradley starts holding her hair back. And as soon as she's done puking, she yells and snaps at Bradley that you got your show, now leave. So Bradley does what she's told and leaves the trailer and looks at Chip and says, she'll do the next segment, but after that, I have no idea. So Chip tries his hand at calming down Alex, and when he goes in there, he's met with a little bit of a friendlier face than the one that Bradley got, and Alice confides in Chip that she's getting a divorce. And really, that's the main reason of why she's so upset. So it seems like this talk has done some good and the show is back on track. After the conversation, Chip is heading back to his trailer when he gets a call from Fred, who is demanding to know why UBA and specifically morning show assistants are poking around to his privatized firefighters. Because Fred is one of those rich people who privatized the firefighting community to try to save his home. And Chip lets him know that when they started poking around for that story, they had no idea that Fred was one of the guilty parties. But Fred is pissed and he wants this story killed. So now Chip is in between a rock and a hard place because he's being strong-armed by the president of the company to kill the story that he actually wants to run. He meets with Bradley later that night and says, I'm sorry, I don't want to kill your story. I used to be you. I used to push for hard stories. But unfortunately, this is the president of the company, and I kind of have to toe the company line. And they have a nice conversation, but it's immediately interrupted by somebody coming into the bar they're at and saying, the winds have shifted, we have to pack up and get everybody out of here, because the fire is headed in their direction. Right before Chip leaves, he turns to Bradley and says, you know what if we just said fuck Fred and ran the story? Would you be ready? And Bradley says, absolutely, I'd be ready. So that's exactly what they do. They end up running this story, and at the end of it, Chip calls Corey and says, I think I'm ready to talk about that story that you wanted. That night, Bradley is sitting in her hotel room, and she gets a knock at the door. And to her surprise, it's Alex. Alex apologizes for the way she's been treating Bradley and comes clean to the source of it, that it's really her divorce that's eating at her. Bradley tells her that she doesn't have to be this closed off with her. She can be open. She can be vulnerable. And that's when Bradley opens up about her relationship and her family dynamic with her mother, and how her dad actually killed somebody when he was driving drunk. So nobody's family is perfect, and we all have our crosses to bear. But Bradley wasn't the only one getting company that night, because Claire still wants to celebrate her promotion with her boyfriend Yanko Flores, but when Claire walks into Yanko's hotel room, unbeknownst to them, they're caught by Hannah, the lead booker, who throughout the whole episode has been popping Adderall like a stressed out freshman at Harvard. The episode ends with Bradley reading an email from, of all people, Mitch Kessler, who tells her, I think I have something that you might be interested in. The group has returned from California in episode 7, and Chip tells Corey of his plan to get Fred out of the job. He says while he doesn't have all this concrete proof, he's got a bunch of emails, and where there's smoke, there's fire, and his plan is to leak it to the media and have them dig deeper to find out the real truth. And Corey tells him, if you're going to do this publicly, you better make sure that the stuff that you have is going to take him down, because Fred has been in this situation before, and if you do this publicly and it doesn't work out, you're going to lose your job. And Corey has good reason to give this warning to Chip, because Fred is in fact looking to get Chip fired for the Mitch allegations. He's looking to pin all of this on Chip. Fred is looking to let Chip go after the, quote, internal investigation comes out, and has gone so far as to put a meeting on the books with Corey and another executive producer that he knows. So Fred's planning on letting Chip go. But while Chip and Corey were meeting that night, Bradley and Mitch are meeting. Mitch is willing to show her where the bodies are buried, tell her everybody who knew, but what he wants in return is an interview. He wants Bradley to interview him on the morning show to get his side of the story out. And initially, Bradley has no interest in this. She tells him, one, they're never going to go for it, but two, I don't want you to be exonerated for this. And he says, well, the ratings would be great. You're going to get your views. It's a great story. Seems like a win-win for both parties. And on top of it, I think I can get somebody to corroborate my story. It's somebody that I slept with, and it helped their career considerably, and they don't hate me for it, and they would back up everything I said. So let me know if you want to do this story, because I'm going public with it with somebody, and it might as well be you. And what's really concerning Bradley is that this story would take down the entire show. So she's going to let Mitch know, but she's battling with it back and forth if she wants to do it or not. And then there's the matter of Alex, who that night, while people were planning interviews and coups, she was busy telling her daughter, along with her future ex-husband, that they were getting a divorce, and the daughter does not take it well. The daughter sides with the husband, saying that this family has taken a backseat to your career, and you've been extremely selfish throughout this whole ordeal. And Alex takes this really hard, because she truly does love her daughter. And the next day, right before the show, Bradley steps into Alex's dressing room and just wants to check on her, and Alex tells her that they let their daughter know that they were getting a divorce. And this is just Alex heeding Bradley's advice to be more open with her. But they have to get ready to do a show, and in the control room, Mia, Chip, and another producer are arguing about what the last story should be. And the other producer wants to do it on climate change, but Mia wants to do it on this abusive coach. And the younger producer is getting really uptight about this and really defensive, to the point where Mia says, you gotta stop talking to him like that. Chip's your boss. To which he responds with, well, then he's your boss too, so why don't you get your lips off of his ass? I mean, after all, it's what you do best. And as soon as he says it, the entire control room kind of stops, and he apologizes because he knew that he crossed the line. And even though Mia says it's fine, let's just move on, Chip says, no, it's not fine. Pack your shit and get out of here. You're fired. The kid goes, are you serious? I just told her to her face what we've been saying behind her back for the past 18 months. Chip says, yeah, no, I'm serious. Get the fuck out. You're fired. As soon as they go to break, Chip heads into his office, and Mia is right behind him. Mia demands that Chip hire him back and says, you have to hire him back. Do you think this is helping me? I know how everybody looks at me, but you have to hire him back. And Chip, who is clearly dealing with a lot of stress, says, I shouldn't be punished for this. I'm not the one who fucked Mitch. And I'm as stressed out as anybody about this whole situation. Mia just ends up walking out very annoyed, but it gives you an idea of what she has to go through with her coworkers. After the show, Chip meets with Maggie Ellison, the expose reporter who is doing a story on Bradley Jackson. This is the same reporter who interviewed Bradley Jackson and who is kind of working that page 6 angle. So she's interviewing Chip about Bradley Jackson, and he's surprised because she doesn't ask anything about the Mitch Kessler allegations. And Chip wants to give her this information, so finally he comes right out and says, I have the names that you want. I have the people who knew. But Maggie's a little thrown off by this, and she says, you've always been a good soldier. Why are you doing this? And he tries to get her to bite by saying this is a good story, and she agrees. And she says, this is a good story, but the real story is, why are you bringing it to me? So she's very hesitant to take this bait. So while Chip is trying to talk to a reporter about a former anchor, he's about to lose a current anchor of his. Because Daniel Henderson has decided to meet with Audra and the competition. And what he tells her is that when he was courted to go to the morning show, he was brought there with the assumption that he would be able to do news. And now he's doing the twist. So he's worried that if he would go to the competition, it would be much of the same. So he's worried it would be a lateral move. Audra's doing everything in her power to get Daniel Henderson over to her side, even playing the race angle, but he's just worried about making the switch. But this quick meeting has to end because all of the anchors need to head back to the office to do a photo shoot for publicity purposes. And during the photo shoot, Alex tells Bradley that she's going to have to announce on the air that she's getting a divorce. And her lawyers have let her know that it's going to be awkward and painful, but also the fact that she's probably not going to come off that well when she announces it. And unfortunately, because she's a celebrity, it can't just be simply that two people fell out of love. There's got to be a story and a backstory behind it. But she sees this as an opportunity because Bradley is thought of as so, quote, real. So she invites Bradley over later that night for dinner at her house to discuss it. Now, while this is going on, Mia is in the control room just trying to get some work done. And one of the workers in the control room chastises her for the kid getting fired. She reminds him that she's not the one who got him fired, and she didn't want him to get fired, but he doesn't back up. To the point where somebody else in the control room has to tell him to drop it. And Mia gets up to leave, and he says, I'll drop it, but some people won't. And that's when Mia has had enough. She grabs the microphone and makes a plea to everybody in the office. That to everybody, she's simply going to be that slut who slept with Mitch Kessler to get ahead in her career. But the fact is, we've all made mistakes, and I just want to get back to work. And you shouldn't judge me for this one action because all I want to do is work and move on with my fucking life and not be remembered as the person who fucked Mitch Kessler. Bradley immediately goes after Mia to see if she's okay, and Mia apologizes for not telling Bradley about her past relationship with Mitch. But Bradley says, no, I'm glad you said what you said, and I'm just sorry that you had to go through this, and not only that, but you had to go through it alone. And Bradley's kind words really do put Mia at ease. But Mia's plea to her coworkers couldn't have come at a worse time for Claire and Yanko, who are heading to HR to let them know about their relationship. They didn't really have a choice, though, because somebody in the office reported the relationship, and it's a very stressful interview for both parties involved. And much like Alex with her divorce, that it can't just simply be a divorce, it's the same thing with Claire and Yanko's relationship. It can't just simply be that they're in a relationship, because they're getting questioned on who came on to who, was anybody pressured, is there an abuse of power, when was the first time you guys had sex, very intrusive stuff. And the HR person really isn't helping them out because everything they say, the HR person's coming back with, well, I didn't say that. You're saying that. And you're the one implying this. And Yanko's worried about being the next Mitch Kessler, while Claire's worried about being labeled as someone who's fucking her way to the top. When the reality is they're two consenting adults that are in a relationship. But while that relationship is trying to get off the ground floor, Alex's relationship is obviously ending. So she heads to her daughter's dorm room to smooth things over with her, because of the fact that her daughter was so upset when they announced to her that they were getting a divorce. And she's brought pizza as a peace offering, and she's just trying to explain her situation. They were two people who were in love, but they fell out of love. And this has nothing to do with Mitch Kessler. We're simply just two people getting a divorce. But the daughter doesn't want to hear any of this, and she's being extremely rude to Alex. It gets to the point where their daughter yells, just, you know what, get out and leave. And Alex obliges and says, fine, I'll leave if you want me to. And as she's leaving, her daughter says, you know, and you're just going to go off and tell America about this whole situation, aren't you? And that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Alex. She turns around and tells her daughter, fuck you. You think you know everything, but you don't. I shouldn't be punished for wanting a career and for wanting something of myself. And you think you have it all figured out? Well, then you go out and you make your dreams come true and you figure out how easy it is. You know, I sacrificed a lot for you and you're sitting here and judging me. And the fact is, I got tired of your father treating me like I was a 5-year-old. And the conversation eventually ends with a pair of fuck yous, and Alex grabbed the police and storms out. And the real tragedy in this whole situation is, She got a full pizza and she throws it out. And there's two girls just sitting there watching this go down, and I'm sure they were hungry because they're college students. It's just a waste of a good pizza. But then this episode comes full circle because Bradley has decided that she will agree to Mitch's terms, and if he can get someone to corroborate the story, she will push for an interview. So Mitch says okay, he gets in his car and he heads into town. But the person he meets with is shockingly Hannah the booker. And Hannah says, Mitch, what are you doing here? And he says, well, you got something out of me, and now it's time I get something out of you. The entirety of episode 8 takes place 2 years before all of the allegations of Mitch Kessler come to light. It's his 50th birthday, he's king of the world, and sure, he makes some inappropriate jokes here and there, but nobody really takes it to heart, and it's just kind of playful banter. That day's morning show needs a political guest, and the head booker at the time, a guy named Jared, had just gotten lazy and complacent with his job. Now, Hannah is a junior booker who knows a political guest and ends up getting the morning show that political guest they needed. Mitch Kessler takes note of this, but he also takes note that Hannah is gorgeous. So they get the political guest on, Mitch is impressed, and the show goes off without a hitch. But that night, they're going to be celebrating Mitch's 50th birthday, and as him and his wife are heading to the party, which is supposed to be a surprise party, but Mitch knows it's going on, Mitch's latest affair pops up in conversation. This gives you an idea that this isn't a first time for Mitch Kessler. But his wife refuses to let it ruin her night, and the conversation dies down. They head into this not-so-surprise party that's been put together by his friend director Dick Lundy. And if you remember from previous episodes, Dick has also been under the fire of sexual assault allegations. Although much like Mitch, because this is 2 years before all that comes to light, he's also king of the world, happy as a clam. So Mitch walks into this party, he acts surprised, he receives his gifts, and everybody seems to be having a great time. They're drinking lots of alcohol, sharing stories. And over in the corner, Fred and the former head of the news department are having a conversation about Alex and how her approval ratings are so far down that she's being taken off the Major League Baseball's playoffs. And she's been a staple on the playoffs for years now, so this is a pretty big deal. They're replacing her with Mitch. They're also raving about this hot shot from entertainment named Corey Ellison. So this is a precursor of Corey taking over that job. As the night dies down, though, Hannah looks at her phone and sees that there's been a shooting in Las Vegas, and the morning show needs to get out there. Now, obviously, Mitch and Alex will be heading out there, but they're looking for their head booker, Jared, and he's nowhere to be found. So in the spur of the moment, Mitch says, you know what? Jared's gotten lazy. Give me that Hannah girl. Also, take Mia off my team. It's too awkward. So right before they leave, Chip heads over to Mia and tells her that she's going to be taken off Mitch's team. And Mia, of course, takes this as a slight. She thinks she's being punished for breaking things off with Mitch, and of course she is. So then she asks to be put on Alex's team, but Alex has no interest in her. She doesn't want Mitch's sloppy seconds. So Mia, at this point, is a woman without a show. So the morning show flies out to Vegas to cover this shooting, and during this time, you're really able to see the dynamic between Mitch and Alex, and how close the two truly were. They flirt with that line of brother-sister, but also having a sexual relationship. It's weird at times. You can tell these are two people that really enjoy working with one another. Now, at the end of the night, as Mitch is walking the strip of Las Vegas, he sees Hannah, and Hannah is still shell-shocked by the shooting. So they start walking together, and they're talking about her career and life and the darkness of the world. And Mitch says, you know, there's something that always makes me feel good in sad times, and he invites her up to his room to watch Caddyshack. And while Mitch is cracking up, Hannah isn't, because Hannah can't let go of what she just witnessed. Hannah says, you know, I probably should get going because we both have work tomorrow, and Mitch gets up and starts hugging her, but that hug turns into a pretty long hug. Mitch ends up starting to kiss her a little bit and tells her that he really likes her, to which Hannah says, well, I like you too. But you can tell by her face, which Mitch can't see by the way, that she is extremely uncomfortable. The two end up having sex, and while she never says the word no, you can tell by her face that she didn't want this and had no idea this was coming, and had no idea that this is the reason she was being called up to the hotel room. She's experienced a shocking moment in Las Vegas with a shooting, and now she's having a traumatic experience in Mitch Kessler's hotel room. And to make matters worse, when everybody goes back to New York, she's kind of walking around in a daze, and when she sees Mitch in the hallway, he just says, Hannah, and keeps his head down, never acknowledging exactly what went down in Las Vegas. When he reacts like this, Hannah loses it and heads right up to Fred's office. She barges into his office and says, I have something to tell you. When we went out to Vegas, Mitch Kessler, and then she starts breaking down. She can't even get the words out. And Fred says, you don't need to say anything. You don't need to say anything. Because Fred doesn't want to be culpable in this situation. Fred says, you know, I've heard about you, and you do really good work, and that head booker job, that might be open. Hannah looks shocked and says, is this how it goes? And Fred says, yes. If you do great work, you get promoted. Hannah, looking pretty pissed off, says, okay, so now I'm head booker. And Fred agrees, yep, you're head booker. And you could tell that she is completely disgusted by what is going on. He basically paid her off to shut her up. And ironically, this is when the Harvey Weinstein allegations first hit the papers. And as Mitch and Alex watch these allegations roll in, Mitch and Alex are both disgusted by these allegations, but they also don't see the irony that Mitch Kessler in this newsroom is basically Harvey Weinstein. Episode 9 takes place right after Episode 7 with Mitch standing outside of Hannah's apartment. And he wants Hannah to corroborate his story. But his story is a little different than her story. Because the way he sees it, she used him, had sex with him to get a better job on the show. So he says, look, let me know one way or another, but your story's going to get told and I'd like you to be a part of it. Now, at the same time that Mitch is meeting with Hannah, Bradley and Alex are having dinner to figure out how they're going to play this whole divorce thing. And during the conversation, Bradley ends up springing this Mitch interview on Alex, and Alex loses her shit. She tells Bradley she's getting played, she wants to know why Bradley didn't bring it to her in the first place. And this civil conversation ends up turning into a real fight that ends up getting pretty nasty with Bradley just leaving the house. And as soon as Bradley leaves, Alex gets on the phone and demands to have a lunch with Fred. And the next day at that lunch, Alex tells Fred that this whole Bradley thing was a mistake. She tells him that she wasn't thinking clearly when she made this move, but now Bradley's trying to take down the show and that just can't happen. She also tells Fred about the Mitch interview and says that Mitch has information on Fred, and then I think the play here is just to simply get rid of Bradley as soon as possible. Now, Fred is completely okay with getting rid of Bradley, but he also wants to get rid of Chip. Fred wants to get his guy in there, this guy named Marlon Tate, who he knows. And even though Chip has been Alex's producer for years, and she does feel loyalty to him, she wants Bradley gone so badly that she agrees to meet with Marlon, right after he meets with Corey Ellison, in a you scratch my back, I scratch yours situation with Fred. And Alex knows exactly who she wants to replace Bradley with. It's Daniel Henderson. So the plan that she's concocted is that she's going to send Bradley out into the field and have Daniel Henderson fill in for Bradley. And after a while, America will get so used to seeing both of their faces that the announcement will come out that Bradley's true passion is being a field reporter. And while she's telling Daniel this, she does say, hey, keep it hush-hush, because I don't want this plan getting out. And this could be the big break that Daniel Henderson's waiting for. So as soon as he gets done with talking to Alex, he heads outside and calls Audra and says, we got to call this whole thing off. I might be a fool right now, but I got to go with the devil that I know. So Daniel Henderson was planning on leaving the morning show. Now, obviously, all of this is going on without Bradley's knowledge, and she's headed to Corey Ellison to pitch him the Mitch interview. And of course, Corey Ellison loves it. So at this point, you've got Bradley and Corey versus Fred and Alex. Now, Corey and Bradley bring the Mitch interview idea to Chip, who just found out, by the way, from a staffer that his replacement is being vetted by UBA. So he's a little shell-shocked at the moment. So while he's getting pitched this Mitch idea, and everybody knows it would be huge ratings, he's worried that they're using this show as a nuclear bomb. He says maybe he can get Alex to come over to his side, and Corey cuts him off and says, I'm just going to let you know, I'm not the only one meeting with Marlon Tate. Alex is also meeting with him. And when Chip hears this, it puts the fear of God into him because Chip and Alex have been a team forever. And while the stab in the back from Alex hurts, he still isn't sure if he wants to do the Mitch interview. Now, speaking of Mitch, he's trying to figure out exactly how to play his divorce in his New York apartment when he gets a knock at the door and it's Alex. And Alex lets him know, there's no way in hell I'm going to let you come on this show and do an interview. And Mitch says, that's funny because I haven't heard from Bradley yet. And Alex says, I'm just letting you know you're not going to use my show to take down everybody in your warpath. And Mitch looks a little bit puzzled and says, I'm just trying to take down Fred, but this idea that you're not complicit? And Alex immediately says, I'm not. And Mitch starts to crack up and say, you used to make fun of all these people. And you knew everything that was going on. And Alex continues to act like she has no idea what was transpiring. And Mitch once again reassures her that I'm not coming for you, but I'm taking this story to somebody, and how's it going to look if my former home wouldn't take the interview? It's going to look like you guys were staying silent this entire time. Now, this can be big ratings for the show, and it could be big for you, and the reality is you're going to be fine. You're a woman, and no one cares at this point if women were complicit. Your career is going to be fine. But I'm either going to you or I'm going to your competitor, and that's exactly what Bradley sees in this that Alex doesn't. Finally, Alex plays her final trump card. She tells him that she's going to have to address her divorce on the air. And everybody's going to think it has to do with the Mitch Kessler situation. But the reality is, working with Mitch Kessler, that's a big shadow. And I remember one time in Chile, you reamed me out for cutting in your segment, and I felt so bad. And I remember feeling so bad that we went out later that night, and I just remember drinks and more drinks and more drinks. And somehow that night, I ended up in your bed, and I just can't figure out how I got there. And Mitch looks completely shell-shocked and just says, you won it. And Alex, stone-faced, says, try me, and walks out of the apartment. So at this point, Mitch really needs Hannah to come through. And Hannah is meeting Claire for drinks, and Claire and Yanko are still going through the issue of how to go public, and they're about to embark on their, quote, first public date. And Claire's explaining to Hannah about their relationship, and Hannah says, I just think it's a bad idea, and if I'm going to be honest with you, I'm the one who reported you guys to HR. And of course, Claire gets pissed off and says you had no right, you have no idea about our relationship, and you didn't even come and ask me about it. And of course, Claire doesn't realize that Hannah's trying to protect her from her firsthand experience of getting used. And even though Claire doesn't think she's being used, and in all honesty, she's not being used, Hannah is trying to protect her. She tells her, you're young, you're talented, and you have your whole life, and you shouldn't be labeled because of who you're dating. But this doesn't calm Claire down. And while she's pissed off at Hannah, and she does go on the first date, the more and more she thinks about it, the more she realizes Hannah may have a point. And right before they actually go into the restaurant, she ends up calling off the relationship with Yanko. And Yanko is devastated, and in all honesty, so is Claire, but she's got a career to think about. And she doesn't want to be labeled as somebody who's getting ahead because she's dating somebody with quote-unquote power. But to get back to Hannah, she's agreed to meet with Mitch, but she wants to get her side of it out. She was young and naive and had a light shined on her from the star of the show. And she really thought it meant something when he told her that she was talented. And when she went up to that hotel room that night, she had no idea that that was going to happen. And Mitch takes offense to this, saying, you're a booker. Your entire job is to seduce people to come on to the show. You can't get mad because you were seduced. Come on, you're smart. What do you think happens when the star of the show is making $20 million, takes an interest in a junior booker? Come on, you knew what was going on. Either that or you're an idiot. And the most amazing part is Hannah doesn't want anything from this situation. She simply wants Mitch to realize her side of the story, but he's failing to do so. And at this point, she just wants the conversation to be over, so she lets him know she will corroborate the story, but she just wants her name out of it, and she wants him to leave her alone. And finally, we reach the season finale of the morning show. Bradley and Chip meet with Mitch to go over the plans of the interview, and they find out that the person corroborating the story is Hannah, and they are disgusted. And they're also very worried that Mitch is going to make himself out to be the victim of this. But Bradley's more concerned with Hannah, because Hannah has no idea that the place she's corroborating a story for is her own show. And Bradley is not willing to do this interview if she doesn't have Hannah's okay. She doesn't want to blindside Hannah with the Mitch Kessler interview. Now, while those two are meeting with Mitch Kessler, Maggie is meeting with Fred, and she lets him know that she's going to be investigating UBA for the allegations that she's heard about. And Fred is completely blindsided by this and demands that she kill the story because of how much he has done for her in her career. But she refuses. She says, I'm not going to kill the story. This, me letting you know about it, is my courtesy. And as soon as she leaves, he gets on the phone with the people that were handling the internal investigation and says, you better have a report for me on my desk by Tuesday, because Fred needs a fall guy ASAP, and of course that fall guy is unfortunately going to be Chip. That Monday, as the staff returns to work for the morning show, it's a very hostile work environment because of the backstabbing and the negative energy in the air. But one of the people that hasn't arrived to work yet is Hannah, who's getting a phone call from a Los Angeles number, and when she answers it, it's somebody from UBA offering her a promotion out in LA. And while she's shocked and taken aback, she suddenly gets a text message from Maggie wanting to interview her. And it seems like the two have something to do with one another. And after the show on Monday, Bradley goes to meet with Hannah and lets her know that Mitch Kessler is going to be doing the interview on the morning show. And Bradley wants her side of the story, but Hannah doesn't want to give it. Her feeling is that it's not her job to take down Fred and the company. And Hannah starts to lose a little bit and mentions that she was offered a job, and Bradley says they're just trying to silence you. But Hannah just wants this thing to go away. So she tells Bradley, whatever you're doing, keep me out of it, and she walks out of the room. So it looks like their interview is dead. But later that day, Bradley gets a text message from Hannah saying she's reconsidered, so Bradley goes to meet with Hannah. And Hannah is telling the whole side of the story, but Bradley keeps pushing and pushing for more, much like she did with the Mitch Kessler accuser earlier this season. But finally, Hannah snaps. She yells at Bradley, I'm not going to be your Ashley Brown. I'm not going to break down for you and have this sob story. I think about this every single day. And the fact that somebody you admire got on top of you and used you, it's ridiculous. But you know what? I'm strong and I'm going to keep going. But it's clear that she's losing it. And Bradley is taken aback by this and realizes she's gone too far and starts to apologize and says, fine, we won't do it. But Hannah says, no. Do it, but just make sure before you do it that I've accepted this new job in LA before they take it away from me. But over in the office, Chip is extremely stressed out and is freaking out on his staff over the smallest minute details. That is until he finds out that he has a meeting on the books with Fred for 4 o'clock. And when he finds out about this meeting, he knows what's coming and he starts to revert back on his previous behavior and starts to tell the staff how much he appreciates them. He apologizes and says we've all had a bad day and reminds them that they're the best and they're his people, but really this is Chip's goodbye to them. And before Chip is going to meet with Fred, Fred is actually meeting with Alex, and Alex is trying to save Chip's job, but to no avail. She wants to know why we can't just have this internal investigation come out and put Chip on administrative leave, have Marlon come in for a few weeks, and then transition Chip back into his role. But Fred says nope, a precedent has to be set, and he's sweetening this deal by letting her know that she'll have co-host approval and more money in her next contract as soon as she okays it. And as soon as she okays it, Marlon is in and Chip is out, so she reluctantly agrees to the deal. And as Chip is going up to meet with Fred, Alex is coming down and she can't even look at him. And that's when Chip truly knows he's done. So because Chip knows that he's going to meet the executioner, he goes in that meeting extremely hostile. Fred tries to put the blame on him and tells him that the internal investigation will be released tomorrow and he's going to be the blame of it. But he's no longer employed by UBA. And then you see that scene in TV shows and movies that never actually happens when a guy rushes out to a busy New York sidewalk, doesn't bump into anybody, stands in the middle of it, and just collects his thoughts. But as soon as he does collect his thoughts, he calls Bradley and says, we got to speed this thing up because they can't let the internal investigation get out tomorrow because as soon as it does, he becomes the fall guy and Fred is off scot-free. So that night, Chip meets with Bradley to figure out how they're going to handle getting Mitch into the studio because Chip no longer is in the control room. And eventually this turns into an argument about everybody's motives, but at the end of the day, they realize they still need to do this interview, no matter what the motives are, and they need to figure out a way to get Mitch in that studio without Marlon and Fred figuring it out. So right before the morning show that morning, Chip meets with his old assistant and lets her know the plan that when Alex goes downstairs to do a segment, the assistant is going to sneak Mitch in the back door and Bradley is going to conduct the interview. And the segment that Alex is doing is never actually going to see the light of day. And all the while, Corey will be in the control room making sure that the camera is pointing at Bradley and not Alex downstairs. So the assistant has her marching orders, she's agreed to it, and she heads off to work. Now, Claire is also headed off to work, but she wants to reconcile with Hannah over how they ended their last conversation. Claire has shown up at Hannah's building, and Hannah, by the way, accepted the position in Los Angeles before she went to bed that night. But unfortunately, she's never going to get to go to Los Angeles because Claire finds out that she overdosed, and Hannah is dead. Now, the staff doesn't know yet, and they're standing around listening to Fred, Marlon, and Corey address everybody as to this new regime coming in, with Marlon taking over for Chip. And while Fred is addressing everybody, Bradley gets a phone call from Claire, and Claire lets her know that Hannah OD'd last night. So Bradley announces to everybody of what's gone on, and everybody is completely shocked and broken up about Hannah passing away. As Alex is sitting in her dressing room, Bradley comes in and says, hey, I gotta go, I gotta get out of here. I can't do this anymore. And Bradley comes clean with Alex about how they were going to do the interview. Alex was going to be downstairs. Mitch was going to come in. Spills the beans on everything, including Hannah and Mitch's relationship. And Alex is blown away because she had no idea that Hannah and Mitch had anything to do with one another. So Bradley storms out of the building, but Alex can't let her leave because she needs her, and she goes after her. She stops her on the street and says, look, you're a shitty person for doing that to me, but I'm such a shitty person that I went to Fred Micklin and tried to get you fired from this place, but you can't blame yourself for what happened with Hannah. And after Alex freaks out on a fan on the sidewalk, Bradley says, look, I'll come back if you just calm down. So both of them head back to work, and Bradley calls Chip and says, we can't do this interview because Hannah's dead. Now, Chip was planning on picking up Mitch that day, and when he sees him, he tells him that we're not doing this interview because Hannah is dead. And the two get into a fist fight in Mitch's lobby. Eventually, the fight subsides and Chip walks out of the building. And when he does, he calls Alex to let her know that he's the one who tipped off the New York Times to the Mitch allegations because they were planning on getting rid of Alex. And he knew that if they didn't have Mitch, they had to keep Alex. So to protect her, he's the one who leaked the story to the New York Times, knowing that it would get Mitch fired and knowing that it would force their hand to keep her. And he's just trying to show that he was loyal while she wasn't, but she doesn't get the message because at this point, she's on air, and she is completely flustered. And Marlon, the new producer, comes in, having never met Hannah, having no idea who Hannah is, says, hey, let's do this one for Hannah. To which Alex throws water in his face and says, get the fuck away from me. And when the broadcast actually starts, Alex just starts getting up and walking around aimlessly. And everybody in the control room is thrown off by this behavior. And finally she goes, I have something to say. We haven't been honest here at this news station. Not necessarily with the news, but this isn't all what it seems. And Bradley looks at her and says, are we doing this? And Alex says, yep. And they start coming clean on everything. Everything that's going on with Fred Micklin, everything that's going on with Mitch. And while this is happening, Marlon is desperately trying to stop stop the broadcast, but Corey is telling him to continue. And when Fred gets wind of it, he rushes down from his office, but the staff has locked him out, as Bradley and Alex tell the world what happened. And credit to Alex, who's taking full responsibility for it, but both of them put the network on blast. But it doesn't last long because eventually the network does shut down the feed. And that is how the first season of the morning show wraps up. So thanks everybody for watching this or listening to it if you didn't actually watch it, because you can listen to it. Please subscribe to the channel. I would really, really appreciate it. It helps me eventually one day get paid, since YouTube makes you have 1,000 subscribers before you actually cash in. They're lame like that. So I do appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. Likes are cool. I don't read the comment section because they're a cesspool. And if you thought this video sucked, by all means, hit the thumbs down. I really don't care. But thanks for listening, and thanks for watching and getting to this point of the video.